Secondly, do all 3 papers and Q&A at the end. Cameras and microphones off during the presentations, but if you're willing and able, cameras on for the Q&A at the end. And obviously, any questions you've got, you can raise your hand or signal via the chat. But obviously, feedback, comments, whatever during the chat is fine as well. And I'll try and collate all of that for the discussion at the end. So our first speaker is EvaMarie Lindahl, and I'm going to do short bios because obviously longer ones are in the program. So EvaMarie Lindahl is a Swedish artist and PhD student, and her research project, Reframing the Non-Human Animal in Art Production, is a practice-based one within the field of critical animal studies at the Centre for Human Animal Studies at Edge Hill University. And I'll stop at that point and pass over to EvaMarie. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Brett, for that introduction. And now I'm going to share my screen and find my presentation. And you should all see it now.
Yes, all good.
Perfect. Okay. As you said, Brett, my name is EvaMarie Lindahl, and thank you so much for having me. And as you also said, I'm an artist and a researcher, and as an artist, I mainly work with performance and drawing and text. And I'm doing this PhD at Edge Hill, and I'm in the final stages of that, quite confused still. Currently in a really small writings hut where I'm trying to finish up what feels like a mess right now, but I think it will be clearer sooner or soon. I'm in the southern parts of Sweden in a small village on the countryside called Thur. And the PhD I'm doing is practice-based, and that means that I'm standing with one foot within the practice of art and another within the field of critical animal studies. And the title of the research project is Reframing the Non-Human Animal in Art Production, and it explores how non-human animals are framed within both cultural and physical frames within the field of contemporary and historic art production. And it investigates ways of challenging these frames by writing and performing counter art histories of classical oil paintings in which non-human animals are portrayed. And the aim of this project is to make animal lives and bodies that are used within art production to go from invisible to visible, and that the histories around the paintings are less anthropocentric, and finally that the transformation of living beings into art material is actually ended. And so today I'm going to present to you a work that is still in progress, so please be kind about that. The work is now a 10-meter long collage that is both digital and physical, but you will see the digital version. It's also a text-based artwork that I will read for you while we look at the collage. And it's also a chapter to an introduction chapter for a book I'm working on. And the texts that you will be listening to are some counter art histories then that are imagined perspectives of the ones portrayed. But first, I would just like to say a few words of what are some of the key concepts that I've needed to have like in my mind to be able to write these counter art histories and like not fall back into the old human habit of writing anthropocentric histories, and thereby hopefully creating a more empathic reading of the roles the non-human animals has been dealt as material, study object, and symbol throughout art history. So, refusal of symbolism. Throughout this project, the portrayed non-human animals are refusing symbolic readings of themselves. Therefore, instead of being viewed as representation for human affairs and emotions, each painted individual that is investigated is treated as a once breathing individual with emotions, history, and agency. By refusing symbolism, I hope that the artworks of this project will make visible how non-human animal bodies are used within art production and how this affects the actual life of animals. Hoping to shift the attention of the visitor to the museum from an anthropocentric one filled with symbolic reading into a hopefully more empathic one filled with lives, hopes, and agency, and a sense of the fauna of the art museum. So usually the story about this painting is that the parrot in the cage is a symbol for the social cage of the two young women. Disappearing out a window. When focusing on the paintings that I am about to research, I always start by looking directly at the violence, the violent core, that is the blood, the pressure, the force, the cage, the hand. Then I continue by focusing on the architecture, the clothes, the colors, the artworks, the windows, that can be seen if you place the focus of your eyes just a little to the side or perhaps behind the point of physical violence. I do this because I need silence to think and feel. But this space is also the crucial point where emotions really are felt. Imagination and chance meet, and consequently research expands. And it does so in companion with the experience of the violence witnessed before. Escaping through a window of a painting, imagining what is happening outside, who the artist is, without first noticing the violence and bringing it along as a companion, is to risk forgetting what is essential. Therefore, it is first after researching the core violence and consequences of the geese that I let myself notice the window to the right of the painting and let myself open and go through it, looking at the context of the situation, the time, the space, the artist, the material, and the setting. And for example, if you go through this physical window that exists in the real world, you end up at a restaurant at Brøndum Hotel in the northern parts of Denmark, where the artist Anna Anker lived. And in November each year, they celebrate Morten Gås, and they still do. And that means that they have this really elaborate dinner where a lot of geese and ducks are killed before to be eaten. And they still do that and have that celebration each year. Okay, so crowded non-human autobiographies. Lately, I've been thinking about my texts as crowded non-human autobiographies because of the need of finding a way of writing autobiographical texts and testimonies that are capable of space and time travel, and that sometimes can incorporate several individual experiences. Histories that, while held with cotton gloves in the contemporary, could bear witness to the grinding of bones and priming of canvases in the artist's studio a century earlier. Histories that can travel between the space of the studio, the field visit, and the museum. Most painted non-human individuals are representations of several, since it perhaps took several to make an in-depth study. Some to be looked at alive, some to be killed to be still, some to be killed and dissected to fully understand and represent. They are all part of the process of art making and therefore part of the biography of a painted and specific auto. Together they form a crowd and maybe a choir of a space and time as part of an autobiographical crowded auto. That even though using the eye to evoke emotion and empathy and personal experience, never only speak about themselves, a self that might not even have existed, but also the lives lost in the process of making art. Okay, so I'm about to show you this collage and read the text. And I forgot to put my timer on, but I think I have 10 minutes, right, Brett?
Yes, you're fine.
Good. So the work takes 10 minutes, and just listen and view, and I will try to read through it. Okay, now. All these hands, caressing me, stroking me, hitting me, painting me, carrying me, archiving me, stealing me, finding me, caring for the layer of paint that is a representation of me. We are surrounded by each other. We are gazelle, deer, elk, cat, horse, bull, goat, yak, dog, pig, monkey, crab, parrot, cow, and all the other names that you have given us. We are collected by the artists who seem to need the bodies of us to express what they want to tell and show the world. It is like you cannot tell about the mysteries of the world without our feathers, hairs, and blood, as if something is missing. We are a mystery to you, filling your art with mysterious meaning. We seem to be beasts, a nuisance, impressive, cute, and we are caught, feared, and caged. You recognize our suffering. You have seen it, but you keep on causing it. You know of our suffering, of the knife that has to pierce our bodies, of the grinding that is needed for us to become material. Still, you keep on doing it. To me, art is a tyrant. It demands heart, brain, soul, and body, the entireness of me. Nothing less will win its highest favor. The artist is both the warden and the caretaker employed by this tyrant, feeding me, keeping me warm, caressing me, but also imprisoning me and accompanying me to my death. This means that these paintings are paintings of oppression, and they are filling the walls of museums all over the world. It keeps on going. I cannot see an end to it. This painting is a representation of the physical me and the ones before me. We have been restored and archived. We have been studied and collected. We have been bought and we have been given, and we have been surrounded by golden frames for a longer time than we can remember. Art historians, archivists, and artists have told you to read our presence symbolically, but we won't let you. The artist with his easel is standing in front of his. I'm tired of humans and their curiosities. I understand that the paintings of us are transactions, often of a value that goes beyond money. But once I was more than a transaction. Once I was alive, and somewhere along the long line of research travels, I was found and I was studied. And as many before us has experienced, an exotic appearance means death and exploitation. Together we are made out of pigment, mixed together with a binder, binding us to the canvas, forever trapped in this scenery. We are placed within the archives of a museum and framed within golden frames. But this painting doesn't document the before and after, how we were hurrying away, trying to escape the attention of the artist. Almost making it, but not quite. And now we are here. Some of us encountered the artists only for a second. Others have been by the side of the artist for years. I died because of the artist's genuine interest and their eagerness to paint. When moved from the museum to the archive, we are held by human hands in cotton gloves. No human skin has touched me for several years. It could be interpreted as care, but we choose to see it as a way to not feel, to not care, to not recognize or listen. The cotton gloves mean distance. The cotton gloves are here to stop time, to keep us alive forever, to keep us on display. We will be here longer than the artist, the archivist, the historian or conservation specialist. And if we start to grow dark and fade because of time, someone will make sure that we don't. The next time we are carried through the halls of the museum, we promise to resist, to let our golden frames tear the glove. Nothing good ever comes out of being in the attention of humans. We all know this. I would rather disappear, running over the fields, heading for a sunset in the corner, not being remembered, leaving without a trace, disintegrate in history. Everyone here has been held and stroked by humans. We have been unpacked, packed, and stored so many times. At least I exist in the future. Many of us has disappeared through careful renovation by insensitive human hands. At least we are still here. The painter paints, the collector collects, wants to own us in the present moment as well as the future. Imagining us free, hurrying around, climbing trees. The collector wants to entertain his fantasy with the help of a painting. Here we are, and we refuse to be read symbolically. Our sizes are all too often practical, easily affordable, easily handled, easily killed. Our situations are forever documented by artists with the help of binder, pigments, oils, and brushes. Their work documenting parts of our lives transforms the canvas into painting. To be able to paint us, the artist had to study one of our kind, hanging upside down. To paint us, we had to be killed. Humans want other animals to be still so that they can study, so that you can create a perfect watercolor drawing of the back feathers of someone like us. And it takes several. We are not singular. We are a series of us. Thank you.
Thank you, EvaMarie. That was great. I love how you forced us to kind of rethink our relationship to these images, and there's lots of stuff I'm sure we'll be able to come back to in the Q&A. Thank you. So I'll move on to our next speaker. So that's Jessica Ullrich. And Jessica's honorary professor for art history and aesthetics at the Art Academy Munster and lecturer for art education at the University of the Arts in Berlin. And so I'll pass over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. I've given that talk before, just a little while ago at another conference. So if you have heard it before, now it's the time to leave, so you won't be bored, because I saw some people in the audience that have listened to it before. Art is not imaginable without animals. They have been the subject.
You've muted yourself, Jessica.
Sorry, this was not right. But now I hope everything will work out. Okay, animals have been subject matter of art since prehistoric times. The earliest known cave paintings from El Castillo date back to the 4th century BC, and they show wild animals. Throughout art history until today, animals populate the canvases, photographs, videos, and installation of the globalized art world. The beauty of animals inspired creative work. Animals served as live models in academic drawing lessons, and animals symbolized all kinds of abstract concepts, just like wildness or the other, whatever. They represented wealth, power, royalty, or whatever other quality humans wanted to ascribe to them. Animal body parts functioned as material for art, for example, as paints, as brushes, as binders, glues, as taxidermized specimen. Even when live animals became increasingly part of performative artworks in the late 20th century, they still mostly communicated human conceptions and ideas. But in the last 2 decades or so, the so-called animal turn has also affected the art world. It brought about a critique of speciesism, anthropocentrism, human exceptionalism, and the common criteria of anthropological difference. That means it becomes more and more questionable to use and understand animals in art merely as subject matter, material metaphors that can be rendered into images or human ideas at will. Today, animals no longer only constitute an aesthetic, but also an ethical challenge. A symptom of this new attitude towards animals are guidelines, manifestos, artist initiatives, and new teaching methods developed by artists, art historians, art educators, and curators that provide orientation for the use and handling of live animals. I want to mention just a few of the most influential projects in this context in chronological order. One of the earliest texts in this context is an artwork itself, some notes towards a manifesto for artists working with or about the living world by Mark Dion. The text on the gallery wall includes the following statement. Artists working with living organisms must know what they're doing. They must take responsibility for the animal's welfare. If an organism dies during an exhibition, the viewer should assume the death to be the intention of the artist. So Diane reminds artists of their accountability. He does not ask artists not to harm animals, but damage should not result from negligence. The Justice for Animals Arts Guild, which was founded only 1 year later, positions itself more clearly in terms of animal ethics. Its aim is to support artists who use their art to oppose the exploitation of animals. All members of the Artists Guild create art that is motivated by animal advocacy. They generally reject the inclusion of live animals in art. In 2009, the artist Lisa Jeffbrett developed her field guide for interspecies collaboration for art students who want to make art with animals. In this handout, Jeffbrett emphasizes the need to treat animals with respect and to study their behavior and sensory perception before dealing with them. One of Jeffbrett's rules is not to disturb, harm, or force animals to do things they do not want to do. 2 years later, in 2011, the world's largest artist association, the College Art Association, developed guidelines for art with animals. In addition to the statement that, quote, no work of art should cause physical or psychological pain, suffering, or damage to an animal in the course of its creation, end of quote, the CAA guidelines formulate a number of questions. Among other things, they ask, can you make the same statement if you replace the animal? What if you reduce the number of animals? If you refine the use of the animals? The questions are based on the well-known 3 Rs, replace, reduce, refine, introduced for scientific animal experiments. In 2017, the Minding Animals curatorial guidelines for animals in art exhibitions were published, authored by Carol Gigliotti, Yvette Watt, and myself. When it comes to living animals in works of art, the attitude of these guidelines is clear. Animals should not be harmed either intentionally or accidentally in the preparation or in the realization of an artwork. In addition, the uncritical display of dead animal bodies or their parts is opposed as well. Artists should, for example, try to use vegan painting materials. However, works of art that use animal material to indicate animal exploitation are considered legitimate. The guidelines also state that animals should not be marginalized or trivialized in an inappropriate way as symbols, metaphors, or carriers of meaning. For many critics, the guidelines go overboard here because they attack the most common use of animals in art. But by inserting a marginalized group of human beings in the phrasing instead of animals, it becomes clear what the rules are opposing. Every kind of representation always has an effect on reality. If an individual is marginalized, trivialized, or ridiculed in art, this can lead to exclusion, diminishing, or mocking of this individual in real life as well. So degrading depictions of an animal normalize and reproduce the loss of dignity in the real life of this animal. Just like the male gaze on the female body and the imperial gaze on the non-white body, the human gaze on animal bodies has been considered as a gesture of domination. What all 3 gaze constellations have in common is that they are one-sided, hierarchical, and voyeuristic. As an art educator, I personally adapt my teaching methods to the animal turn. Since 2018, all art students who take my own classes in art education at the University of Arts in Berlin get a crash course in animal ethics before we discuss artworks that involve animals. If the students themselves decide to work with or about animals in one of my classes, they need to fill out a questionnaire that I have developed together with my student Anna Regel after they have completed their practical work. They have to reflect on the ethical implications of their project and have to specify what they have learned about the involved animal in their project that could not have been learned without him or her. Some of the students feel that their artistic freedom is being constrained by the assigned preparatory readings in animal ethics, as well as by the follow-up questions that touch ethical issues. Also, scholarly writing is increasingly taking into account the ethical implications of the sourcing and inclusion of live or dead animals in art-making practices or in art exhibitions. One of the latest examples is this article, Artistic Freedom or Animal Cruelty, Contemporary Visual Art Practice that involves live and deceased animals, published just a few months ago in the journal Animals, I think in January this year. The authors state that, quote, Animal bodies on display should not be presented as a spectacle or be voyeuristic, nor become a morbid curiosity, end of quote. And they recommend the implementation of animal ethics discussions within gallery programming as a means of avoiding what could be considered unacceptable uses of animals within exhibitions. The initiatives and guidelines mentioned, and there are many more, are often understood as a form of censorship. But all the guidelines are non-binding sets of rules, primarily meant to be food for thought. Due to a new sensibility towards animals, artists are simply asked to think more about how they depict animals and how they treat animals in artistic frameworks. Until recently, the majority of protests against the use and abuse of animals in art did not come from art experts. On the contrary, negative reactions from animal rights activists, online petitions, etc., often intentionally became part of the work and contributed to the success of an artwork. A major change in the art world is that artists today have to anticipate that criticism against animal cruelty might come from within their own community and not only from Philistines without any deeper understanding of contemporary art. This was for a long time the argument when the general public disapproved of animal abuse in artworks. So considering these recent developments, one could state that guidelines, activities, and discussions about animal ethics that have evolved in the art world due to the animal turn might indeed bring about some kind of restrictions for art. On the other hand, with the animal turn, art is also fundamentally expanded through the inclusion of animals in the production and reception of art. Animals are no longer just perceived as passive subject matters, models, muses, metaphors, or material in art, but they are increasingly being taken seriously as creatures with aesthetic capabilities and feelings. Art by animals and art for animals are new phenomena of the animal turn. There have been experiments with painting apes or studies on the aesthetic preferences of fish, pigeons, and primates before the turn of the century, but this research took place almost exclusively in the natural sciences. In the art scene or in art history, aesthetic productions by and for animals, with a few exceptions, did not play a role. That has changed in the last decade, which is reflected in a large number of exhibitions and publications. And I have just here a list of major exhibitions in 2009, but there are many more. An exhibition like Animal House in Ottawa, for example, has been entirely dedicated to creative expressions by animals, including paintings of elephants and chimpanzees and scratchings of dogs and turtles. The animal turn also led to the establishment of the new genre of interspecies art. In interspecies art, artists grant value to animal creativity and build on the role of animal co-authors in collaborative projects. One example of interspecies art would be Kut, Sema Bekirovich's collaboration with two Kuts in Amsterdam in 2006. The artist offered the bird some personal items that had a certain often sentimental value for her, like for example, photos of her parents or plastic toys or dollar bills or money, and documented the rendering of the material by the birds. The birds arranged some of the material to build their nests in an Amsterdam canal and ignored some of the things they didn't like. In this way, the work points to the different material preferences and thus different worldviews of the artist and the birds in a shared urban environment. Sema Bekirovich did not alter the behavior of the coots, who as a species have already adapted to building their nests with trash that they find in the city. The work also alludes to the adaptability of birds in urban spaces who, for example, incorporate technical sounds like cell phone ringtones into their songs. But above all, it brings to mind one of the most talked about examples of animal aesthetics, the elaborated arcades of the Bauer bird in New Guinea. These carefully arranged architectures are decorated with brightly colored objects like berries, flowers, snail shells, and iridescent wings from beetles, but also plastic straws and plastic caps from water bottles. By invoking these associations and taking into account the joint production process, the choice of material and the situatedness of the birds in an urban space, a work like Kut not only showcases a form of relational aesthetics, but also visualizes the absurdity of distinct categories such as nature and culture, which have long been questioned by scholars such as Donna Haraway, Bruno Latour, or Philippe Descola. Another example of interspecies art is the collaboration of Ute Hörner and Matthias Rantlefinger with the two African grey parrots, Clara and Karl, in the artist group Smuk. For the Smuk weekly series, the human artists handed over magazines to the birds and exhibited the resulting paper reliefs. The parrots could decide whether to take over the magazines and how to use them. Their gnawing, nibbling, and scratching probably had not only biological functions, but also displayed a joyful, playful, and purposelessness component. Hörner and Antlefinger shared their lives and their studio space with the parrots. Sometimes they even worked together at a diagonally divided working table. But the human artists were careful not to intervene in the production process of the birds. Their own artistic intervention was limited to deciding on the form in which they handed over the parrots' productions to the art world. More or less, Hörner and Antlefinger acted as curators for Clara and Karl's productions. These two examples show that interspecies art is always initiated and conceptualized by human artists. Unfortunately, the instrumentalization of an animal for the sake of art cannot be avoided. And this instrumentalization can happen in a paternalistic and exploitative manner. On the other hand, interspecies art can also grow into a political instrument for animal liberation by challenging the idea of human exceptionalism. When artists discover aesthetic qualities in animal productions and help humans to experience other animals as creators or co-creators of art, a purely anthropocentric concept of art is called into question. Interspecies art makes human audiences perceive other animals as feeling, communicating, thinking, and acting social and historical individuals. But not only art by or with animals broadens the possible scope of activity for human artists, other animals are also increasingly being discovered as possible audiences for artistic productions. Rachel Mayeri, for example, produces videos for captive chimpanzees. Marek Brandt composes music for free-living wildcats, and Kröd Jurak and Alex Bailey make performances for pets. They all do extensive research on the animals' likes and dislikes before they develop and realize their work, attempting to meet their audience's aesthetic preferences. With their use of surprising images, sounds, or movements, their work can turn out to be interesting or even entertaining for animals. But this effect cannot be guaranteed, measured, sometimes not even be perceived by humans. The chimps, cats, or dogs are free to leave or attend the screening, concerts, or performances, at least always within the scope of their often restrictive environment in the zoo, for example. They can even decide if they want to become involved as co-performers. As art audience, they for once get the opportunity to look back, thereby challenging an anthropocentric framework in which animals often exclusively serve human desires for entertainment, scientific knowledge, emotional support, and so on. Art for animals presupposing an animal audience might provoke humans to imagine the existence of alternative worldviews or aesthetic preferences that are different from our own. Another and last kind of art for animals takes a more activist approach. The animal turn initiated a new form of practical artistic animal advocacy on the threshold of activism, artivism. In The Basement, Erik van Lieshout dealt with the precarious living conditions of cats in the basement of the St. Petersburg Hermitage. The filthy basement has been inhabited by cats for at least 200 years. Together with his assistants, van Lieshout converted it into a cat-friendly environment, creating and arranging sleeping baskets, scratching posts, climbing bridges, and litter boxes. The resulting furniture had a sculptural character, and the whole installation was clearly framed as a performative artwork, but the work also turned the actual place in a more livable environment for the cats. An even more existential effect had an artistic intervention by Yvette Watt. Her Dark Lake project disrupted duck hunting in the Molting Lagoon on Tasmania's east coast. Under Watt's leadership, 7 women performed a dance choreography to the music of Swan Lake on a raft in the lagoon at the beginning of the duck hunting season. They wore pink tutus, pink leggings and t-shirts, and with their array of pink kitsch, the female performers ironized the exaggerated macho culture represented by male duck hunters with a similarly exaggerated chick culture. The loud music, dance movement, and bright colors disturbed the hunt and not only raised public awareness for the victims of the hunt, but also saved the lives of quite a number of ducks that day. In my view, the animal turn poses some challenges or even restrictions for artists, but it brings about far more expansions and also some aspirations. By holding artists accountable for their use and misuse of animals, it limits some questionable forms of human artistic agency. But art that reduces animals to their symbolic, material, or aesthetic function in an exploitative manner is pretty conservative, or at least not very progressive anyway, because it only reaffirms the outdated notion that the value of animals lies solely in their usefulness to humans. And by introducing animals as creators, co-creators, or audiences for, or beneficiaries of art, the animal turn opens the field for animal artistic agency, thus broadening the range of art itself. Art has always been an important field in the debate about the anthropological difference. Those who emphasize human exceptionalism declare the ability to produce and appreciate art to be one of the few remaining attributes of humanity. If art is thus considered as defining trait of humanity, the possibility of aesthetic enjoyment and creative practices by non-humans is automatically a no-go. But I think in the experimental sphere of art, it must be possible to challenge these traditional assumptions. Artworks for, with, or by animals question phenomena such as aesthetic expression, aesthetic sensibility, or aesthetic agency as purely human abilities in a playful way. By taking animal perspectives and animal agency seriously, art for, with, or by animals can help change the reductionist human attitude towards other animals. And this, in consequence, may alter human treatment of other animals. The animal turn in art has the capacity to become truly revolutionary. And I mean the strict sense of the Latin word revolutio, turn around. It provides the chance for the art world and its protagonists to turn away from human exceptionalism and human supremacy and to turn towards the potential of a post-anthropocentric shared world. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That's a fantastic overview of a whole range of practices and debates and manifestos. And it also is great to hear the positive possibilities of those things, but also your kind of criticisms and potential drawbacks of them. And so there's lots to do that we'll be able to discuss connected to that later. So thank you so much. Paulina, your final speaker. So I'll just introduce you. So Paulina Szymonek is a PhD student of English literature at the University of Silesia in Katowice in Poland, and her research interests include animal studies, ecofeminism, and nature writing. So Paulina, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, let's try the screen sharing.
All good.
Okay, so urban walls in France. I'll be talking a bit about this literature and art. And I think, first of all, I'm very happy to be, presenting here. So thank you for this possibility, and I'm enjoying this conference tremendously so far. I think especially this panel is super interesting, if I may say so. I will look at a particular art installation, or actually 2 art projects, which I think will tie up nicely with the previous presentation, in which the ethics of animal use in art projects was discussed just now. Okay, so for a start, imagine a pack of wolves running through a public park, jumping over benches, nosing around trash bins, playing with plastic bags, playing with Coca-Cola cans, and eating meat from Carrefour, packaged and frozen, that is delivered to the stores. And this actually happened in France in 2009 for 3 months, from June to September that year. A pack of 6 wolves was running in the moats of the castle of the Dukes of Brittany in the city of Nantes. And the animals were obviously separated from the human audience by metal fencing. It was a live installation, a live art installation by Stéphane Thidet, and the wolves were what's called animal actors, trained to star in commercials and movies. And Olivia Rosenthal followed the logistics involved in bringing the captive animals to the heart of the city. She interviewed people in charge. She interviewed the wolf trainer. And all of that inspired and became a part of her 2010 novel, To Live with the Reindeer. I'll use the translated title. And in the novel, the story of these captive wolves is narrated alongside the life of the protagonist. We learn that the protagonist goes from a desire to own a pet to identifying with predators like wolves, and then a desire to escape her own captivity, which is in this novel her mother, her husband, and the society, because she's a lesbian and she's hiding her sexuality. And Olivia Rosenthal is sort of holding up a mirror when she's describing animal lives and the life of this woman, to show the predicament that both animals and women and people who identify as queer in general, how they are seen, how they are set in these binary oppositions that devalue animals in favor of humans and devalue women in favor of men, and so on. But it also shows how power relations exist even within the oppressed groups. In the end, in Rosenthal's novel, as well as in life, I suppose, humans are still seen as being higher in this hierarchy. And so this mirror she holds up is a bit crooked. But what she sets out to do basically is to explore the possibility of dismantling these binary oppositions, the possibility to abandon this way of thinking. And that takes us back to the art installations using live animals in them. If you look at the cover of To Live with the Reindeer, both the English and the French editions, you can see a white wolf pacing around a deer in a white room. And the picture comes from The Departure, which is Mircea Cantor's short film from 2005. It's only 3 minutes long, not full 3 minutes, I think. It was filmed in a gallery in Paris, and it shows just that. A wolf pacing around a deer, and these animals were just put together in this all-white room, and they're visibly distressed. This gallery space is so unnatural to them, as I suppose would be unnatural to us. And there was only the camera, and the animals were just left there for the audience to see what would happen. But the animals behaved nothing like the audience would expect. So the deer was just standing there, breathing heavily, sniffing the air. She knew she was in a room with a predator. And the wolf lay down and kept panting and yawning, which is, of course, a sign of stress. And Cantor said that the audience would naturally expect a bloodbath. So a wolf killing and eating his deer. So it's not what it says about the animals themselves, but what it says about humans. And the ethical problem raised by putting these two animals together in a small, confined space, with no regard for their well-being, is not acknowledged at all. The art project was supposed to show the suspension of this basic animal instinct, because the deer and the wolf were seemingly calm and not, this predator-prey interplay did not occur. But the art project actually manages to deepen the divide between humans and animals. And a similar thing can be said about the art installation in a city in France with 6 wolves running in the park. And it's in this urban environment that that it's especially interesting to consider our changing relationship with animals, because traditionally urbanization process would leave everything opposed to culture outside the city borders, leaving no space for nature, for the wild. As Jennifer Walsh argues in her essay from '98, Zoopolis, cities have maintained this cultural divide. So for urban wildlife, for pets, for livestock, animals kept in zoos and lab animals, life in a city often means suffering or death. But for humans, it entails disconnection from nature. And this distance between humans and animals is visible in our attitude towards wildlife parks and zoos, which I think often tells us more, again, about ourselves than actual wildlife we're looking at. And the novel, To Live with the Reindeer, makes it clear that Rosenthal, the author, came to realize this during her own childhood visit to a zoo. In one article she wrote about it, she describes zoo as a theater where people come to watch the unwilling animal actors. The zoo she's visited as a child was actually closed down in 2008 for renovation, and she refused to visit it since it reopened. She likens the enclosures to a stage and the zoo space to a gallery. With its own set design, the zoo hosts a daily spectacle of sorts. The animals become part of a live exhibition, a collection, or an art installation. And this shared space for humans and animals is supposedly designed for both sides, but its architecture is really tailored mostly to the needs of the human audience. And what Rosenthal finds especially outrageous is the language adopted by the management of the park, who describe captivity in terms that conceal the reality behind it, refusing to use words that could shock the visitors. So barbed wire or gates or containment areas become envelopes, membranes, and shelters, way more benign, more pleasing to the ear and the eye. And veterinarians, stakeholders, and architects, among others, were consulted during the development of this project of this zoo, but not the 180 species of animals that would be housed there. And this refusal to take into consideration the animal perspective, the refusal of their subjectivity, of their agency is I think what's really at heart of the matter here. In her book When Animals Speak, it's a fairly recent book from 2019, EvaMarie argues that animal agency is too often disregarded, which, quote, reinforces viewing animals as mute in contrast to humans, which only deepens this anthropocentric approach and unequal power relations. But also when humans speak out in the name of animals, as is often the case in animal activism, there's this risk of obscuring their perspective. So those who speak for animals need to be aware of these power relations. And Olivia Rosenthal is aware of this, and she resists speaking for animals in her novel. They are not given a voice, but their experiences are actually described in such a almost dispassionate technical tone, so that these experiences, these animal behaviors, speak for themselves, so to say. So Rosenthal, Walsh, and Meyer postulate that we rethink our relationship with animals in an urban space. The nature-culture dichotomy, which is deepened by urbanization, can be overcome by seeking relationship with non-human animals that would acknowledge not only their presence, but also their agency, which would obviously entail abandoning the impulse to segregate animals into pests, pets, and commodities. And this would also entail abandoning this impulse to devalue common species in favor of the rare or endangered ones or popular ones. Since all animals, from dogs to rats to pigeons, actively transform their habitats, they are not objects but subjects and ought to be recognized as such. And to this end, Volge proposed a trans-species urban theory that would take into account all animals that live in cities, both wild and domestic, including urban wildlife, pets, as well as farm and laboratory animals. And such a theory, she argues, is, quote, necessary to the development of an eco-socialist, feminist, anti-racist urban praxis. And she notes that the topic of animal subjectivity is often not reflected in eco-socialist or feminist practice. I suppose, it was written in '98. I think a little bit more was done in this respect in recent years, but not nearly enough, I think. And establishing meaningful connections between such theories and environmental efforts is necessary. Is a necessary step toward recognizing animals as non-human subjects rather than objects, and to creating a true trans-species community. To deconstruct this human-animal divide, it's also crucial to abandon these dualistic and hierarchical approaches that devalue others on the grounds of species and race and gender and sexuality. This urban practice is really needed, I think, especially now in times where there are often more captive animals of certain species that are kept as pets than there are wild ones out there. And when there are so many zoos, and when meat is still so widely consumed, and when wild animals are left with no or little space left for themselves. So obviously they are forced to, so say, trespass into human territory. And although wild animals entering or living in cities is nothing new, it's not a recent phenomenon. This crossing of this invisible boundary causes fear in the urban community. And this intrusion often leads to the death of the animals. And this human-wildlife conflict is present whenever people come into contact with animals. And yet in the urban environment, it's perhaps perceived as more outrageous than anywhere else because of this division between civilized and the wild, and because the urban residents are not used to sharing their territory with wild animals, and they are perceived as danger and nuisance, and their presence takes away this sense of relative safety that humans cling to. But since animals are unlikely to leave the urban environment anytime soon, I think perhaps it's time to look for ways of coexistence. The title of Rosenthal's novel, To Live with the Reindeer, asks a childish question. If we look at the literal translation, what do reindeer do after Christmas? Where do they go? And the question becomes more serious as the novel progresses, asking how reindeer fare in the wild today. And the fate of wild wolves is also uncertain. France exterminated its wolves in, I think, late 1930s, but the turn of the century saw their comeback. By 2017, wolves were roaming the outskirts of Paris. And in early 2020, a couple of wolves were actually sighted on the city streets in a big city in France. They were taking advantage of low human activity during the COVID pandemic. Um, and the wolves explored this human space just like the wolves in this 2009 art installation, where they were obviously confined. And obviously, these two wolves would not settle there in the city, as Olivia Rosenthal notes. Cities are not made for wolves, nor wolves for cities. But the presence of wolves roaming the urban infrastructure at night reminds us that we share this planet with other creatures and that the wild may be not as far removed from the city life as we would like to think, perhaps. And at the same time, it does not exist for our entertainment or aesthetic pleasure, but we may develop a respectful relationship with it. And obviously, we're left to wonder whether using captive animals in art projects reflects human superiority or selfish dominion. Thydet's decision to leave the wolves for 3 months on display basically was met with strong opposition, and the ethics of using live animals as part of an art installation came under debate. But perhaps the question we should pose is not whether the art installation is any less ethical than keeping, for example, captive animals in zoos, but whether breeding and use of animals for the sake of artistic expression and entertainment is ethical at all. And even more importantly, whether it takes into consideration the animals themselves. As it stands, the animal's well-being is considered only in terms of their basic needs, so food, shelter, veterinary care, but without accounting for the broader context in which they are used. So the wolves in the 2009 project could hardly teach the public about the behavior or ecology or conservation of wolves in their natural environment. It was actually the human condition that was studied, I would argue. And Rosenthal was aware of the chasm that separates humans and animals when she wrote that humans have a right to identity, animals don't. And just to finish, to be recognized as equal entails the right to independence, and which in turn involves the right to freedom. Equal rights for humans and animals would dictate that wild animals should not be kept in zoos or for entertainment purposes. Instead, they should be allowed to live alongside us, their agency and their rights acknowledged. And this human-animal division that may still stand in the world that Rosenthal describes, in this world presented in this art project with city wolves, is a choice that reflects the state of our culture today, but it's really up to us to redefine that relationship. Yes, and these are the two wolves that that last year took advantage of the pandemic and were roaming the city at night. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina, for that presentation, for talking about some examples that I didn't know of at all. So it's great that you brought those to our attention, but also the kind of complex entanglements to do with ethics and the urban and the relationship between nature and the wild. There's lots to kind of cover there. So thank you for that. So can I invite, so Jessica, you've got your camera on. EvaMarie, can you stick your camera on, please? And also invite anybody else who's able and willing to put cameras on so that our presenters don't have to look at a sea of black boxes, if that's possible. So I'll open this up then to questions and comments. And of course, EvaMarie, Jessica and Paulina, if you've got comments, responses or questions for your fellow presenters, then you're welcome to kind of raise those and note those too. So I'll open it up to the floor. Who has the first comment, question or response? Okay, maybe I might start then. Which is, I was thinking about, as you were running, all three of you, right? So it's kind of a comment to all three of you about the kinds of animals that appear in these kinds of art. And that's both historically, but also it seems when people are interested in the kind of ideas that you were talking about, Jessica, kind of trying to rethink those sorts of relationships. And we keep coming back to mammals and birds, it seems. And I'm just wondering how we deal with, or if anybody is dealing with, I don't know, slugs and spiders and a whole bunch of other stuff, whether that kind of causes complications in terms of art, whether you know of examples where that's happening. And then also that question of, am I right in thinking we repeatedly come back to mammals and birds? Maybe I'm wrong and it's my limited knowledge of this material, but there is this difficulty, isn't there, of we focus on particular kinds of groupings of animals, don't we?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand.
Okay. You click the microphone button first, EvaMarie, so I'll let you go, even though Jessica put her hand.
Yeah, okay.
I'll go EvaMarie first, if that's all right.
I just like to mention like Katja Agler, who made art with slugs, for example, murder slugs. Murder slugs. I don't know if that is like what it's called in English, but in Swedish it's called murder slugs. Yeah, it's really weird. But anyway, it's these slugs that eat like all the plants that you plant in your garden, and people are really upset about them. And she made like art together with these slugs and also sculptures of them, where they were an active part of making drawings, that the slime that they produce made drawings over a canvas. And I think that was like a beautiful example of just changing the environment a bit, and in like actually being really interested in the pattern of the slugs themselves. But I think, yeah, I mean, I would say that there are a lot more birds and mammals than insects going on. And like speaking from my own position of the paintings that I look at, just like very, very few still lifes are mostly like if I want to look at insects, I need to look at still lifes. And it's really difficult to me to write like texts, emotional texts about insects. It's like I don't really have that capability to connect. It's like there's something wrong with me. I haven't really gone that far yet. I'm struggling with the spiders, and I'm struggling with a lot of other insects, just recognizing them. And I think it's just like really difficult for me. I also have difficulties of thinking like fish. I've really tried to read up on fish and trying to like get into the fish, but I haven't really managed yet. So for me, it's like, it feels like I'm in training to be able to like encompass more species. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, just I wanted to add that there's like big growing body of work with insects, just last couple of years or so. We have Concepcion here in the audience. She writes about artists to use caddisflies, I think. And I have written like a big article on artists to use bees, for example. And I say use because they really use them to make, you know, sculptures or so. And they're very famous artists who work with spiders right now, or octopodes. I don't know the plural. Octopus, several octopuses. So this is like a big movement right now to focus insects because of global warming, I guess, because that's always a big topic, ecological importance of insects, and to slugs and octopuses as well. So there's a lot, but if you display live insects in an exhibition, which happens a lot, spiders, for example, the audience usually doesn't get as upset because they don't feel this empathy. And it's a totally different situation when you have a dog or whatever, like a wolf and the deer, or whatever it was, in a white space of a gallery room, or an elephant or something like that. And people get outraged, and animal rights activists protest, but that rarely happens when you have, you know, like a box with spiders or so. But there are some works. I
notice, if I'm just because you use the word use, then they use those insects. So is it a different form of kind of art practice that will, if you're using that kind of material, do you get a sense that the kind of those ethical debates that you were raising, artists understand those beings differently from an elephant or a dog or whatever?
Well, maybe the agency of the elephant is just more obvious to us. And if the elephant doesn't give his or her consent, then the artwork is not possible. But because I've written this piece on bees, that's like what I'm most familiar with. The artists just buy via the internet bees, like thousands of bees, and then they put them in some boxes and let them, you know, cover some structures with their combs, and then it's very beautiful sculpture that comes out. And afterwards, the bees are sometimes discarded, or they just die, or whatever. So this is why I said they really use them, but not all of them do. There's also some artists who are very, you know, enthusiastic beekeepers who do everything in their power to keep the bees happy. And so, yeah, I haven't thought about that. I think it's just more obvious when a dog doesn't want to cooperate. Well, dogs usually want to cooperate. If a cat doesn't want to cooperate, then it's obvious for everyone. And maybe the artist doesn't want to force this animal or doesn't do that, but she or he doesn't see the resistance of a spider. But I don't know, I haven't thought about that yet.
Thank you. Paulina, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Like you've said, I think it's more obvious the animal agency in these in mammals and in birds. And I think the reason why wolves, and there was, I think, one artistic installation with a coyote, and there are more with wolves, obviously, it's because there are such charismatic species, and we share this love-hate relationship with wolves, for example, and other charismatic animals. So I think that's what would draw bigger attention from the audience and maybe stronger feelings. And like I've mentioned, that there just wasn't the time to say it all, but when this art installation was supposed to happen, and they took care of all animal needs, or all the physical needs they had to, and there was still this strong opposition because there are wolves involved, and I don't think anyone would care that much if it was just some fish being let out, released in the same place, or a pack of spiders. There are even what was it? When they were released there was a group of activists who actually broke into some building, that I don't know, was it caretakers? I don't really remember, but someone broke. The activists broke into some building connected with this art installation, and there were flyers that said, I don't remember what it said exactly, but animal liberation, set free the wolves. So I think it elicited a lot of strong feelings among people, especially in French animal activist groups. It wasn't really that popular outside of France, because I only came upon it by accident when I was researching something else, and I got so interested in this art project. And even The Departure, this short film, wasn't that popular, and it was from 2005, so it didn't turn up so many devoted and outraged people who wanted to protest it.
Okay, thank you. Helena, you have your hand up.
Yes, so thank you first of all to all three presenters, which I enjoyed very much. I guess I have a question for EvaMarie and a reflection for Jessica. So EvaMarie, thank you so much. It was a fantastic presentation that you did. One image in your collage especially captured me, and that was the painting with the child reading to a dog. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I just wonder if you want to share the name of the painting and the painter, because I have this project right now on so-called literacy dogs, trying to be, approach that in a critical manner. So I think it really resonates with that painting. So
I think it's easier if I just post it in the chat, perhaps.
Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Thanks. And then for Jessica, I'm really thinking that the animal turn. Your presentation made me consider how different what different directions the animal turn seems to take in different fields. So in my own field, which is education studies, the so-called animal turn happened quite recently, actually, and so far it hasn't really produced a lot of good things for animals. Rather, it has tended to to bring animals into rather uncritical post-humanist discourses in a kind of appropriative way. So it's just a reflection, how different it can be between different discourses or different fields. So that may be something to reflect about as well, when we engage in cross-disciplinary discussions. So I thought it was quite interesting.
Yes, Jessica.
May I just react to that?
Yeah.
Thank you for this observation. I just wanted to mention, because this is really a big thing for Germany as well, that at the University of the Arts in Berlin, where I'm teaching art education, there's also a small animal turn happening right now. So this isn't the education framework. I also teach art history and aesthetics at another university, but in Berlin in the art education department, and they have in the new curriculum, so for the last 2 years, that's like a new curriculum for everybody who wants to become a teacher, an art teacher. He has to take, or she has to take, mandatory courses in animal studies. So they have like this sentence, every student has to at least get basic knowledge in gender studies, post-colonial studies, and animal studies. So they just sneak that sentence in, somebody who's, yeah, on our side. But this is like a big thing. And I don't know any other university or art college or academy in Germany that has animal studies implemented in the curriculum. But in Berlin, it happened.
That's good to know. If there isn't another question, I'll ask a follow-up to that. Oh, there is, Julia.
I can wait if you want to do your
No, go ahead. I've already spoken. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for, this was a great panel. Sorry, you guys, I'm not on camera because I just woke up in LA, so I'm in my jammies. So my question is for EvaMarie. So as I was listening to your presentation, you commented on the way, so sort of the multiple ways that animals are used, right? And used in multiple ways, right? Body parts and observation for artists who are making paintings. And I'm a photographer, so I reflected that, for film photography, right? Film is still made using animal parts, but I wondered if you could reflect on the depiction of animals or sort of that relationship between maker and subject for, say, a photographer using digital medium.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if, like, I have a super nerdy interest in just painting and paint, even though I'm not a painter myself, but just to reflect upon, and also, actually, I would like to ask Paulina and Jessica also what they feel about this, but I have a really hard time trusting artists in general when it comes to animals. Like, I think we artists, I speak as a we here, actually should just like detox from using other animals than humans in our work. And I think like the way we view other animals, it's no different if you paint or if you take an image or if you like do a 3-dimensional study of an individual. You have like the same gaze and you have the same goggles, so to say. So, and I don't really trust how artists view other animals. So I think it's like incorporated in us and we need to detox that. But that's just like a reflection when it comes to the attitude towards others, I don't know that much about material. So I don't know if that was your answer, but that is what comes to mind.
That was great, thank you.
Okay.
So it's the gaze for you and the trust in the artist and their use of or relationship with the animal. Yeah,
I have a hard time trusting artists. Yeah, I have a hard time trusting my close colleagues. I mean, of not being like really anthropocentric and speciesist in the way we make art. So I suggest that we all detox for a couple of, I don't know, centuries or whatever we need.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, can I then, so EvaMarie, because you started that off by saying, oh, I'm interested in what Jessica and Paulina have to say about that as well. So it'd be interesting to hear. And it kind of connects to the question I was going to ask, which was whether the examples that all three of you have pointed out do represent some kind of genuine turn or they are outliers. And so whether we can read this as positive or whether it's just a trend or they're things that we know because we're interested in this stuff, but actually art practice is largely carrying on the same. I don't know what your response is. EvaMarie's nodding a lot there, but we know she has trust issues. So she would, I don't know what Jessica and Paulina, what you think. Is something genuinely changing, or is it just little moments in different places?
Well, maybe it's just my bias, but I think something is changing. And as I said in my talk also, what is definitely a change is that now people like me, like a art historian or art critics or curators speak up and criticize artists who are using animals in an abusive way, exploitative way. And they are writing about that and they're criticizing it. And that is just a very new thing. Before, I mean, like in the 1970s, there was an inflation of killed animals in performance art. Like everybody killed, decapitated a chicken or stabbed a cow or so, not everybody, but that was like a big movement. And the people who got outraged about this animal cruelty in art were not experts, not inside of the art world. Art critics and art historians and artists themselves usually didn't touch that. And because freedom of art is so important, it's art has to be transgressive, art has to shock audiences. And so, and this has changed a little bit. There are people like Steve Baker, Giovanni Alloy, and Carol Giulotti, myself, and so who criticize artists who cannot be trusted with animals. And I think this is really a change.
Okay, so it's actually very interesting what EvaMarie said. I didn't really think too deeply about that before, how we as artists, I'm an artist, but like hobbyist artist, I'm only sketching, so that, I'm not using animals, but I use animals as my I draw a lot of animals, and it's interesting to look at myself, how I do art and how others do art. And I think we do share this overly anthropocentric take on how we depict animals. And there's even this, that's not too recent, that was years in the making, but how a lot of young artists are depicting animals in this Disney-like way, where the animals are super beautified with exaggerated eyes and features. Not to mention, all the furry culture, but animals as animals. I think this is actually good to take some time to think about that and detox. And about that other thing, is something changing? I think something is changing, obviously. I don't think it's changing enough yet. Obviously, the wolves that were released had all the care necessary for their well-being, but they had no choice, in being released there and kept there for 3 months. And I think we should step away and take a detox, like EvaMarie said, from this kind of art involving animals, if they can't be willing participants, but something that we just put there and say, this is for the sake of these animals, because obviously it, like I said, it was more a study of our anthropocentric view of ourselves than the study of animals. Like Mircea Cantor and Stéphane Thidet, they wanted to show this one, the suspension of animal instinct, and two, how these animals are not, so brutal, that they would kill a deer and that they would attack the human audience, which was obviously separated by a fence and a gate and everything else. But what they showed was just captive animals in another environment, even more unnatural to them. So yeah, this detox, I would think, will stay with me, and yeah, I think we should all think about it.
Okay, we're over time, so we'll have to finish it. Do you really want to say something, EvaMarie? Will it be really quick? I can't hear.
Okay, I'll be really quick. So I need to be the moody one here, actually, because I agree with Jessica and I agree with Paulina, things are changing, but I can also see that the theme of like animals or non-human animals within art is kind of a popularized right now, which also makes it like less critical in a way. So I have this like, I don't know, like critical stress. I'm scared of the like topics being like hijacked and called critical when it's not critical. Like in the same way people suggest that they do art, like interspecies art together with other species, but it's just classical oppression. They just don't know what they are, like they can't recognize the oppression because they are oppressive. And so I'm really like sensitive to that right now. And I mean, I know why it's happening. It's happening because the discussion is going on and it's getting bigger and bigger, and things then get divided into, I mean, we've seen it before. We've seen it with feminism, for example, but it stresses me out. So it's just a good thing and a bad thing. And let's just keep being really critical towards the artist, please. Yeah, myself included. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a brilliant line to end on. So thank you from me, and I'm sure from everyone else, to Paulina, Jessica, and EvaMarie for a really, really interesting talk. Let's go and detox for half an hour and learn to trust one another. And then we'll see you in the next set of panels in half an hour's time. Thanks a lot, everybody. That was fantastic. Thank you.